The forest stood silent, a dense tapestry of ancient trees and gnarled branches. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, a living, breathing entity that seemed to pulse with an ancient rhythm. The canopy above was a mosaic of leaves, filtering the sunlight into a soft, green glow that bathed the forest floor in an ethereal light. John, an avid solitude seeker, had pitched his tent deep within its heart. He had ventured far from the beaten path, driven by a desire to escape the cacophony of modern life. Here, in the embrace of the wilderness, he found a sense of peace that eluded him in the bustling city. The forest was his sanctuary, a place where he could reconnect with the primal essence of life. He craved the isolation, the embrace of nature's raw beauty, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the distant call of a deer with a symphony that played in his ears. Each step he took on the forest floor was a reminder of the simplicity and purity of nature. He felt a profound connection to the land, as if he were a part of the ancient cycle of life that had been unfolding for millennia. Tonight he would find it was a double-edged sword. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest transformed. Shadows lengthened, and the once familiar landscape took on an eerie, otherworldly quality. The sounds of the day faded, replaced by the mysterious whispers of the night. The forest, which had been a haven of tranquility, now seemed to hold secrets in its depths. John yearned for peace, but the forest had other plans. The stillness of the night was punctuated by the occasional snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves, sounds that seemed amplified in the darkness. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the forest itself was alive and aware of his presence. It was a reminder that nature, while beautiful, could also be unpredictable and unforgiving. The air was crisp, the scent of pine needles heavy in the air. Each breath he took was filled with the rich, earthy aroma of the forest. The pine needles underfoot created a soft, natural carpet that muffled his footsteps. The forest was a sensory experience, a place where every sight, sound, and smell was a reminder of the natural world's complexity and beauty. John built a small fire, the crackling flames a beacon in the gathering darkness. The fire's warmth was a comfort against the chill of the night, and its light cast dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. As he sat by the fire, he felt a sense of accomplishment, a primal satisfaction in having created something that could sustain him through the night. He ate his meager dinner, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. The simple meal, cooked over the open flame, tasted better than any gourmet dish he had ever had. There was something profoundly satisfying about the act of preparing and eating food in the wild, a connection to the way humans had lived for thousands of years. An owl hooted in the distance, a lonely, haunting sound. The call of the owl was a reminder that he was not alone in the forest, that other creatures were going about their lives in the darkness. It was a sound that was both comforting and unsettling, a reminder of the wildness of the place he had chosen to call home for the night. The forest was alive, watchful. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting a silvery glow on the forest floor. The shadows seemed to move and shift, creating an ever-changing landscape of light and dark. John felt a sense of awe and respect for the forest, a recognition of its power and mystery. As he settled into his tent for the night, he knew that he was a small part of something much larger, a vast, interconnected web of life that stretched far beyond the boundaries of the forest. Night descended, blanketing the forest in an inky blackness. The moon hung high, casting a silvery glow that filtered through the dense canopy, creating an ethereal landscape. The stars twinkled like distant diamonds, adding to the mystique of the night. The forest, usually teeming with life, now seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for something to happen. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, casting flickering shadows that danced around the campsite. The warmth of the fire was fading, leaving behind a cold that seeped into the bones. The shadows created by the dying fire seemed to take on a life of their own, moving and shifting in the dim light, adding to the eerie atmosphere. John retreated to his tent, zipping the entrance tight. The sound of the zipper echoed in the stillness, a reminder of the thin barrier between him and the vast wilderness outside. He hoped the tent would provide some semblance of safety, a small refuge in the heart of the unknown. He felt a chill, a primal fear he couldn't shake. It was as if the darkness outside had seeped into his very soul, awakening ancient instincts. His breath came in shallow gasps, and he could feel his heart racing. The fear was irrational, yet it was all-consuming, a reminder of how small and vulnerable he was in the face of nature's vastness. The silence was absolute, unnerving. It was a silence that pressed down on him, making him acutely aware of every sound, every movement. The usual forest noises, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves were absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. He lay down, his senses on high alert. Every rustle, every creak seemed magnified in the silence. He strained to hear any sign of danger, his mind racing with possibilities. Sleep was impossible. His body was tense, ready to react at a moment's notice. The thin walls of the tent felt like no protection at all. The forest seemed to amplify every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig. Each noise was a potential threat, a reminder of the unknown dangers lurking in the darkness. The sounds seemed to come from all directions, making it impossible to pinpoint their source. It was a symphony of fear playing on his nerves. His heart pounded in his chest. The rhythmic thumping was loud in his ears, drowning out the silence. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, heightening his senses. Every beat was a reminder of his vulnerability, a stark contrast to the calm exterior of the forest. Then he heard it, the distinct sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling his tent. The footsteps were heavy, each one sending a jolt of fear through his body. They moved with purpose, as if searching for something. He held his breath, straining to hear more, his mind racing with possibilities. Was it an animal? A person? The uncertainty was maddening, and he felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The footsteps continued, a relentless reminder of the unknown dangers that lurked in the night. Adrenaline surged through John's veins. He froze, holding his breath, straining to pinpoint the source of the sound. The footsteps continued, measured and relentless, just beyond the thin fabric of his tent. Fear turned his blood to ice. He fumbled for his flashlight, his hand trembling. Clicking it on, he aimed the beam outside, sweeping it across the darkness. There was nothing. The footsteps stopped. Silence descended once more, heavy and suffocating. He was alone, or so it seemed. John lay in the darkness, his heart pounding against his ribs. Sleep was impossible. The silence was now his tormentor, filled with imagined sounds and unseen threats. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch sent shivers down his spine. Then the footsteps returned. This time, closer, bolder. They circled his tent, slow and deliberate, like a predator toying with its prey. John's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing. He had to see what was out there. Mustering every ounce of courage, John threw open the tent flap. The cold night air rushed in, sending a shiver down his spine. He hesitated for a moment, listening to the eerie silence of the forest. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze and the distant hoot of an owl. Gathering his resolve, he stepped out into the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest, and shone his light into the darkness. The beam cut through the trees, momentarily illuminating the forest. The shadows danced and flickered, creating an almost hypnotic effect. He swept the beam from side to side, searching for any sign of movement. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. He caught a fleeting glimpse of something moving between the trees, a shadow, tall and slender, gone as quickly as it appeared. His heart pounded in his chest. He strained his eyes, trying to make out any details, but the darkness was impenetrable. Was it a trick of the light, or had he really seen something? His mind raced with possibilities. Could it be an animal, or perhaps another person? The thought of encountering someone else in this remote part of the forest was both comforting and terrifying. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves, but the fear was relentless. He couldn't be sure what he had seen, or if he'd seen anything at all. The uncertainty gnawed at him, making him question his own senses. He had always prided himself on being rational and level-headed, but this experience was shaking him to his core. Doubt gnawed at the edges of his fear. He tried to recall every detail of the shadowy figure, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. The more he thought about it, the less certain he became. Was his mind playing tricks on him, or was there really something out there? Was it his imagination, fueled by the isolation and the darkness? The forest, usually a place of solace and peace, now felt menacing and alien. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through him. He knew he had to make a decision: stay and investigate further, or retreat to the safety of his tent. The choice weighed heavily on him as he stood there, flashlight in hand, surrounded by the unknown. The footsteps started again, this time accompanied by the sound of heavy breathing close to the tent. John's fear threatened to consume him. He was trapped, hunted by something he couldn't see, something that moved with an eerie silence. He held his breath, listening as the sounds moved around the tent, stopping just behind him. John felt a cold presence at his back, as if something were watching him, studying him. The hours crawled by, each one an eternity. John stayed huddled in his tent, too terrified to move, his every thought consumed by the unseen presence outside. The footsteps and breathing continued intermittently, a terrifying reminder that he was not alone. He clung to the hope of dawn, praying for the first light of day. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching. He was an intruder in a realm where he did not belong, and something ancient and malevolent was making him aware of his transgression. As the first rays of dawn pierced the darkness, John finally allowed himself to breathe. Exhaustion and terror had taken their toll. He emerged cautiously from his tent, his body trembling, his eyes scanning the woods. The forest was silent now, the only sound the gentle chirping of birds. There was no sign of whatever had stalked him throughout the night. Had it been real, or a figment of his imagination born of fear and isolation? John packed his gear with shaking hands, eager to escape the confines of the forest. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that something unseen followed his every move. The experience left an indelible mark, a haunting reminder of the night he spent at the mercy of the invisible stalker. He never returned to the forest, but the memory of that night lingered, a chilling reminder of the unknown that lurks in the